Suchi, why don't you kick it off today?
All righty. Well, thank you, Ritesh. This is Humble Hang with your co-hosts Shuchi Rana and
Ritesh Patel, thank you for joining us today. And it's so exciting it's been a while, a long while, since we've had a conversation with the one and only Craig Lipset. Hello, Craig. Thanks for joining us today. It's so kind of you.
yeah.
How are you?
Ritters, it is fabulous to be here with you. And Suchi, it's honestly like I'm really looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, we're delighted to have you be a part, Craig. Thank you for joining us. And I'm not sure if we can do your intro justice.
Yeah,
Perhaps one of the traditions that we have, how we like to kick it off, is go into people's backstories, right?
yeah.
Take us to day one when you started this work and tell us more about yourself.
All right. So I fancy myself a drug developer by background. I trained in epidemiology as a grad student. As an undergrad, I majored in music, but I always kind of had this interest in the sciences, so let that pull me in a more quantitative direction. Um, in my journey to where I am today, it sort of has taken me in and out of different aspects of this drug development ecosystem. I've worked at research centers like the VA and Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center. I've worked in biotech and pharma, like venture-backed startup biotech, all the way through to Pfizer, where I was the head of clinical innovation. And that sort of led me to where I am today, which is working a little more independently with a number of different initiatives concurrently. But in parallel with that kind of professional career path was a patient journey for me, which I think is a type of story you hear a lot as you uncover these like backstories of people in our field. For me, that journey was one of a patient diagnosed with a rare pulmonary condition called sarcoidosis, which has affected my lungs for the last some 20 years. But that's also given me a great deal of exposure and appreciation for the rare disease community and the role of managing my health data as a part of that. And so I've let that shape and influence my thinking about the space. When I was at Pfizer, we led the first platform to return data back to research participants. We called it our Blue Button Project. And that was at least partially based on how I view the importance of having access and control over my personal health data as a person sort of managing a diagnostic odyssey. I appreciated having flexibility in how I managed my care and health, and that influenced a lot of my thinking for the remote trial we ran at Pfizer, the first fully decentralized trial under an IND. And so I've kind of allowed these experiences of mine and my own patient journey to shape and influence my professional journey.
It's fascinating, Craig, that you give that background, because I remember meeting you in 2010 when I got into this mad industry. And I always say is that the innovation guy, but it is hard to do the kinds of things you've done because it takes a lot of time and effort and patience and diplomacy and ambassadorialship to convince the giant ships that you've been part of to do this stuff. So what's the secret sauce? What's your superpower that you're able to convince people to do this kind of stuff?
I don't know that I have a superpower there, Ritesh, and if I did, I might be losing some of that superpower. I know when I was at Pfizer, I had a fabulous fellow I worked for there for a number of years. And at one point he said to me, "Doesn't your head hurt after just banging it on the wall here for so many years trying to convince people to change?" And during a lot of that journey, I kind of accepted like incremental changes as wins, that notion that these are big ships. And if we can change its trajectory even incrementally, that's a win. But I have to confess, as I've gotten a bit older, and I still have a good head of hair, but it sort of hides my age. I am less patient. I am less tolerant of some of the reasons for why we can't make change happen more aggressively. Nowadays, when I hear the reasons for why we can't or reasons for why it's hard, reasons like we're a highly regulated industry, reasons like patient safety for these therapeutic development programs is essential, it's paramount. These to me are the reasons why we need to do things differently, not the reasons why we can't. And so I have to confess here, Ritesh, my level of tolerance has shifted. I think in the past, I kind of accepted that there was this change curve within an organization, that everybody was on this different journey, and that maybe I had to bring along more of the herd. But nowadays, to me, if you're in the latter half of that change curve, I don't think I'm going to be here to help you. I think I'm going to just have to focus my energy at this point on those that are more change ready and change responsive, and hope that the others either manage to come along, manage to adapt, or maybe they should be doing something else, because there's a sense of urgency here, right? We're developing new medicines for patients who have unmet medical needs. And if our reason for why we are not doing it better and smarter is because we have a lot of people and it's hard to make them manage a change process, that's not really fair as an excuse for those who are waiting for those new medicines.
Yeah. I feel like so much to unpack there. But just out of curiosity, Craig, how has your thinking, and feel like you've embarked on an entrepreneurial endeavor since you perhaps moved out of a large corporation? How has your mindset shifted? And do you feel like it has given you more autonomy to perhaps be agile enough to move at the speed of everything else around you? Like what has that process been like?
It's funny. People will say, Craig, I see you on LinkedIn, so I know what you're up to nowadays. And, maybe I'm active in sharing some things that I'm up to, but it is not necessarily proportionate to how I am spending my time in the real world.
Sure.
And so, for me, there are a couple of different levers that I'm pulling concurrently to try to affect the longer term change that I believe in. And so some of that is a bit more ecosystem wide. These are the areas where I need to be a little more patient and help organizations to move forward. Those are the types of things I'm doing as the co-chair and co-founder for the Digital Trials Research Alliance, DTRA, which we launched as the Decentralized Trials Research Alliance, but it's kind of outgrown that initial narrow focus to take on a broader remit, not losing sight that decentralized is still an important part of how we envision our future, of giving patients more choice in how and where they participate. But for many of the organizations we work with through this nonprofit entity, there are bigger challenges as well that they're trying to tackle, whether it's leveraging AI, real world data, or other opportunities to make drug development go better and smarter and faster. And so through places like DTRA, I have the opportunity to bring together community. I have the opportunity to help get initiatives going that can help us work together around some of those shared challenges. And because we're a public-private partnership with the FDA, we can do that together between industry, research centers, patient groups, technologists, and regulators. But that can only move at a certain pace. And so for that reason, I also invest time through vehicles like the Buffalo Initiative, as another example. The Buffalo Initiative is another nonprofit entity. This one is set up as a nonprofit fund and development incubator for neglected ultra rare therapeutics. So think about it this way. We talk a lot about rare diseases in our industry, and in truth, there are over 11,000 rare diseases, many of which are ultra rare. As an industry, we only talk about the first few dozen or the first few hundred, the few hundred that are commercially interesting. And we see their names pop up again and again when industry is talking about a new medicine development program or a new approval or a new label. But there are literally thousands of other rare diseases for which our industry is just not going to be able to tackle. These are less commercially interesting, but there is great science behind those indications. Many of these are genetically defined diseases, and so they are readily targetable with modern gene therapy, with modern ASOs, with other types of therapeutic intervention strategies, which are already proven. Their challenge is they're just not going to be commercially interesting for traditional pharma. And so that's where we're developing these types of capabilities through nonprofit vehicles, like the Buffalo Initiative. And what we're finding is the stakeholder who rises up to be the sponsor for these molecules is not a company, but it's a nonprofit patient organization. And very often these organizations are led by parents who will not take no for an answer, parents who have an incredible sense of urgency, but likewise, safety is not a compromise, right? These are their children that they're trying to develop treatments for. And so they're not being reckless, they're following science, but they're navigating the process of getting a medicine through an IND and into clinical trials using bake sales and friends and family. And that's not really a fair, scalable, sustainable model. At the Buffalo Initiative website, we've started a tracker where we're actually keeping track of this portfolio of patient-led medicines in development, because it's not a story of just one or two or three. There's an entire ecosystem of these patient groups that are moving medicines forward themselves. They are not partners to pharmaceutical companies. They are acting as a nonprofit pharmaceutical company today. And we launched the Buffalo Initiative to accelerate them. Now, for me, these worlds come back together because we can enable incredible innovations to move forward with the urgency of these nonprofits as sponsors in these rare disease programs, and then de-risk them so that the rest of the industry, the rest of the ecosystem can follow. How do we enable and empower these incredible pioneers for these medicines in rare to also be the de-riskers so that the rest of drug development can learn and benefit from their sense of urgency?
I can see the benefit, and I think the Michael J. Fox initiative with Parkinson's and funding all of that research and, getting as many people together as possible to sort of say, hey, listen, we've got to think about this differently, started that probably 5 years ago, 8 years ago. The question I always have struggled with is, yeah, we can go do this, and I'm on the board of the Asthma and Allergy Foundation, and food allergies is a big one right now. It's that holy grail of how can we figure this out, and lots of patients and mums primarily are all involved in fundraising for research and all of that. But there'll come a point where we'll have to get it into the marketplace, and I fear that we'll go back to the old pharma model of getting into the marketplace, right? Once we've discovered something. Are you working on something to also change that piece of it? Because I love the changing the way we're doing the research and not-profits and patient advocacy groups getting involved. But sooner or later, you're going to have to manufacture it, distribute it, and get it into the patient's hands, right?
That's right. Now, fortunately, there is an ecosystem of entities you can work with to make that happen without being a biopharmaceutical company and without having to generate the types of returns that a traditional biopharmaceutical company has to, whether they're publicly traded or whether they are venture-backed. And that's been our challenge, right? The venture-backed, the public sector pharma model works amazingly well for an overwhelming number of indications. The Parkinson's and the allergy indications work very well in those types of models. It is a returnable therapeutic area. The challenge tends to be in these very small ones, right? So how far can a patient group go? Well, we're already starting to see just how far, because in Europe, we already see now an approved indication, an approved new medicine that was developed by a nonprofit entity. And now what we're starting to see are how can we put together patient support programs which include access, reimbursement support, the types of support programs that we typically deploy for access through commercial models. How can we stand those up to support nonprofit entities? Because we know through digital and other innovations that the level of cost required to stand those up is radically different than what it looked like years ago. And again, this is not meant to admonish the for-profit biopharmaceutical industry. Again, it works incredibly well and it's a vital part of our healthcare ecosystem. But we now have this opportunity, and I think AI and digital is a great enabler of this, for us to broaden who can be a sponsor, not just for the discovery and the clinical development, but even all the way through to the launch and access for those molecules. They still need a level of reimbursement, and they
Mm.
still need, therefore, smart people engaging with payers and others to make sure reimbursement strategies are there. But they don't need to generate the level of return for shareholders in the process. So we think today about the role of contract manufacturers, the role
Right.
of innovators that are disrupting, what platforms can look like for these types of gene therapies. I think these are what's going to come into play as well as we think about how far a nonprofit entity can go in moving that molecule from the bench to the patient.
Do you think the public-private partnership model would work here? Because some of the rare disease drugs that come out, the cost of the cost is huge if it's been developed by a biotech, let's say, right? Talking about three, 400, $500,000 a year for some of these things. In this model, if you create the right public-private partnership, do you think the pricing will change as well, and then the reimbursement will occur? Is that the hope?
I think that that's going to be a part of it for sure, is to try to make sure that not only we can develop these medicines, but they can be accessible for the people that need them on the other side. Now, if you think about a model like the Buffalo Initiative, in that language of public private partnership, the Buffalo Initiative is actually a blended capital model for how we're developing a fund to finance these. And by blended capital, that means it's both philanthropic as well as venture philanthropy. There are
Interesting.
some institutes, there are some organizations, some contributors to the Buffalo Initiative that will treat it as a purely philanthropic opportunity. There's a 501c3 element. It has all the benefits that entails. For others, they want a return of capital, but it doesn't need to be a 7x
Yeah,
biotech return.
yeah,
For some, it's a 1x return. I just want my capital back to be able
yeah.
to redeploy. Or maybe it's my capital back with a modest return. And so the notion of a blended capital of fund means we have these different tiers of capital to deploy for different levels of risk, and we can return that capital where we need to. But it also then gives us much more flexibility to move forward these molecules that have high probability of technical success because the nature of them being highly targeted, or
Mhm.
because they're leveraging genetic delivery platforms and payload capabilities that are already proven.
Mm.
Now, a lot of the challenge you point to here, Ritesh, also just goes back to the cost of goods for
Yeah,
manufacturing
yeah.
these types of molecules. And there is a wave of innovators that are trying to tackle that. But certainly the platform designations that one can get from FDA can at least help when navigating your cost of goods through the IND process.
Mm.
But for these to really be scalable in a meaningful way out the other side, we certainly need to see other innovations around how these molecules are manufactured.
Can can I quickly can we go back to a couple of topics, Craig? For folks that may not be familiar, but I feel like it impacts a lot of us, right? Clinical trials, who gets included, what that process is. Can you talk a little bit about the process and also the decentralization of it? What does that mean in this context?
Absolutely. When we think about clinical trials and evidence generation for new molecules, a lot of that is based on running these protocols, which tend to have very restrictive eligibility criteria because we're looking for very specific people that meet those criteria for the study. We really want to, well, two things, right? Scientifically, we have a hypothesis of who this molecule will benefit, but also those designing and investing in these studies want to increase the probability of answering their scientific question. And one way to do that is by narrowing down the population that we're trying to study with these types of eligibility criteria that get so narrow that all of a sudden what felt like an indication with a lot of people, we're actually now like looking for very targeted individuals. Now,
Mhm.
what that tends to add up to is the probability of me finding humans that meet those criteria that live in geographic proximity of where I'm running these studies, it tends to decrease,
Mm.
right? As my eligibility criteria get more narrow and more restricted, I have to look in a wider radius around what are these research centers I partner with to run my studies. And that distance now starts to create burden for
Mm.
people. Clinical trial participation is not for the faint of heart. It does require a lot of engagement and interaction. You're coming in more frequently. But the good news is most people report an overwhelmingly positive experience with their research teams, the staff that they're working with. But that doesn't necessarily make it easy if you have hours that you have to drive or you
Mm.
have to get on a plane. And what are you going to do with your kids when you're doing that? And what are you going to do with your job when you're doing
Yeah.
that and your life, right? And so that's where this notion of decentralization comes in. How can we make it less about you having to always go to a research center to participate, but are there some instances where the research can come to you, where you may be on your terms? Now,
Mhm.
that doesn't work for every study or for every visit, but it can work for a heck of a lot of them. And so, how can we introduce more choice and flexibility for people to be able to participate how and where it makes the most sense for them? Now, how do you do that? It's a mix of technology and services. It's a mix of technology like using video or
Mhm.
other types of follow up and engagement opportunities, connected devices for being able to share different types of diagnostic data, different types of real world data connectivity for me to be able to pull in your electronic health data from other sources. But it's also using different types of innovative service models, having nurses that can travel, having the ability for your visit to take place at a local pharmacist
Mm.
or even at your local doctor's office for some of the procedures in the trial. And so all of that is on the table when we think today about these decentralized elements, these tools that are in the toolbox for research teams when they're planning and designing their study to make these trials less burdensome, more accessible.
Who would say no to that? Would it be the IRBs that you want to change, or is it the primary investigator who maybe potentially says I might lose control? Where are those moments where you have to really work harder?
I think you hit on one of them, which is for many investigators, these investigators are the ones in our language of clinical trials. A principal investigator has a very specific role when it comes to regulation around
Yeah.
being responsible for the safety of the patient who's participating in a clinical trial. And
Mm.
so they need to have confidence in the data and the oversight for those patients. Sometimes, if there are models being introduced where strangers are visiting the patient, nurses they don't know, or data is being collected with a device and just getting beamed off to a database unbeknownst to them, or you're streaming like incredible amounts of data from a connected sensor, but you're not giving the investigator the right tools for them to be able to monitor and have oversight, then all of a sudden the system can break. And
Mm.
those investigators can feel like this is not right for them to be able to support. But also, in many cases, we're still at a place where burden is kind of like matter and energy. We're not really like making it go away. We're just changing
Yeah.
its form and who it's sort of landing on. And so very often we may be shifting the burden from the study participant and it's landing on the study team at the sponsor, the CRO, or at the site. They have more work to do to be able to absorb all these different vendors and all these different new models they have to somehow approve and have support of and navigate compliance concerns. And quite honestly, I have empathy for those study team leads as well. They want to go home and have dinner with their families. Nobody's paying them more to take on this extra work of additional vendors in their study to fill in these gaps. But I'm also optimistic that these are the types of problems that are addressable. How do we make it easier for study teams to be able to incorporate these tools in
Mm.
the right places in their studies so that we can remove burden from participants without just shifting it to other stakeholders?
Quick follow up to that. Do you think do you feel like you get inbounds and you also have, is there a balance between the inquiries that you're getting to be a part of the process, or is it mostly you reaching out to people? What is the fine balance? And then also, is there an intentional process that the sample set being included is sort of diverse enough for a specific
Study.
challenge or problem that yeah.
I think, when it comes to an individual study unit, I think that there's a lot of education and awareness that individual study teams are still navigating. Sometimes in their organization, they might have teams that have already shortlisted vendors and developed reusable processes for themselves, and that's great. For other study teams, they need a lot more help and support around that for being able to navigate it. At the level of like DTRA, we have a really stable, rich community of organizations that are already connecting on a regular basis. And then for, individuals like myself, I'm just fortunate to have a great community of folks, whether thanks to LinkedIn or just thanks to other, forum and spaces where we just get to connect and share. And that creates for me just a nice flow of, interesting people working on interesting challenges that I can, evaluate and see if I can be of help to them, or if there's other friends in my network that may be better suited to help them given the challenge that they're tackling.
That's
It's
great.
fascinating how this changed so much. As you rightly say, 10 years ago, there was a process. You hired these people, you created this program, you went out and got patients, you did the work, you collected the endpoint data, then you put it out to the FDA and say, hopefully they'll approve it. But now we've got so much happening. DTRA, AI, machine learning, drug discovery using artificial intelligence. Researchers can, get together very quickly and then disband again if something doesn't happen, right? Before you have to have a bunch of scientists in a lab going through this stuff. Where is it all heading? Are you seeing a trend around an area? For example, I think 5 years ago, machine learning was going to change the way we do discovery, right? Machines were going to do a bulk of the big work, and then we'll find that molecule, and then we'll give it to the humans to go do something. Are we shifting that, or is it still the same sort of processes?
I think, the low-hanging fruit to me still for AI and machine learning is around drug discovery, and whether we're talking about our ability to design molecules based on knowledge of protein folding, protein binding, or otherwise our ability to, hyperscale how we can screen molecules against different targets today and have better indicators to predict where there may be safety issues along the way. It's when it hits that need for clinical trials and evidence generation that things still end up moving out of the left lane, for those of you that are not in the UK, and into the slow lane. And, that process, even with AI, still seems to have just AI tinkering at the edges, right? We talk about using AI for supporting medical writing processes. That's great, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe we can produce our protocol or IND submissions or safety documentation faster, and that's a good thing. But that's not going to be a game-changing transformation in our timelines. Can we move data in smarter and faster ways in terms of mapping and interoperability? And yeah, I believe we can. But again, not going to be game-changing in terms of study timelines and cost. These will be great efficiency plays. And for large companies that are running trials at an extraordinary scale, that's a good thing. But I think it's going to be like bigger bets out there, like our ability to leverage digital twins and synthetic data in smart ways, our ability to lessen the number of patients, improve the power of our studies, run in silico trials so that just as we're seeing groups that are investing in virtual cells and virtual tissues with the belief that when we test in the lab, we should be just validating, we should already kind of know the outcomes. we should be doing the same with our human trials
Mm.
and really know the outcomes of these studies, running them in small numbers of patients just to validate and confirm what our in silico studies have already told us. We're certainly not there yet. When we think about digital twins as an example, there's different strategies out there, and some are very focused on using real world data. Can I use registry data and
Yeah.
EMR data and other data to try to just understand how will Craig Lipset progress with his disease journey? Maybe it's a predictable course or something we could anticipate based on a lot of different data. I think the way that's going to get to be really exciting is when those models start to meet up with those that are invested in digital virtual cells and virtual tissue modeling, right? So then all of a sudden we have this like population layer based on large amounts of data blended with deep molecular intelligence of understanding at a cellular level. How would Craig progress? And when we start to see paths to bring these two modeling universes together, and they are kind of traveling in separate spheres right now, I think that's where we're going to start to have some incredible predictive confidence to be able to test molecules without running these types of trials the way we know them today. I think we'll get to a place where we start to look back and say, my gosh, I can't believe we ran these studies where we were, enrolling thousands of people, half of whom weren't even getting the new medicine.
I've seen a lot, and we've seen an explosion in one area, which is clinical trial recruitment. A lot of people coming up with new tools, technologies, platforms. I can get you your patient faster, or I can identify them better, or I can convert them into participants better than the other guy. You've seen, my friend Eric just did something over a weekend with Claude, where he basically hacked the clinicaltrials.gov database to make it voice enabled. So you can basically have a conversation with the database now, right? So like a prompt on Claude, I have this, and tell me if there's a clinical trial near me. And then, up pops all those results. Is that all going to make any difference?
Ritesh,
I
have a lot of empathy for people that are building software today.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that most of them are sober enough to realize that the things that they're building are not companies. They may not even be products. At the end, they may just be really nice features that get bundled into something else. Because it does feel like every day of the week, I'm introduced to another person building another tool that looks a lot like the tool I saw yesterday. And, and then you hear these really tragic anecdotes, right? These stories of somebody who presented their software that they were so proud of to a company, and only found out later that that company had engineers doing screen grabs of everything on the back end. And they were tasked with, basically rebuilding that on their side over the weekend because they can.
Because they can.
And they're not going to launch it as a competitor product in the market. They're just not going to buy it from anybody because they feel like, we have an ability to develop software too at our pharmaceutical company, at our CRO. And so why would we buy today? Which is, really hard for the innovators, but it creates a whole other innovator's dilemma to have to navigate today. What is their model for real differentiation and sustainability when it feels like just about anything you could come up with, someone else is already making a scale out of, or, deploying internal to their own company?
Do you think, as we hurtle forward, I love the Buffalo Initiative idea. Do you think that other people can take advantage or create a model similar for other areas that you've done with the Buffalo Initiative? Are there other people coming to you saying, hey, Craig, we'd love to learn more about how you've done this or how this works?
Ritesh, I think that one of the great gifts of this current era that we're in around the use of AI, and again, there will be some great efficiencies for those that run research and trials at extraordinary scale. But I think one of the greatest gifts we'll get is this ability to democratize what had typically been this locked up process. Why is it that biopharmaceutical companies have controlled this process for so long? Well, you need specialized tools and data, you need specialized knowledge, and access to those costs a lot of money. And so, what is AI really good at? Right? It democratizes access to technologies. It democratizes access to to knowledge. Right?
Knowledge,
And
right?
when
Yeah,
you have democratized access to technology and knowledge, it should bring down the cost
yeah.
for the drug development process. And as we see that start to happen, what other entities might start to emerge as motivated to also develop medicines in areas that traditional biopharmaceutical companies are leaving behind? I think you'll start to see academic groups come in next into this mix. Many academic groups have licensing offices that have been prolific at taking discoveries coming out of their research labs and licensing them out to companies. Most of their molecules never make it out of that office. Some of them they may choose to just develop on their own, right? Do they need to license some of these molecules out for a traditional biopharmaceutical company? Is there another tier that will start to emerge that some universities may just choose to continue to develop on their own? Maybe doing so will de-risk it and make it more desirable to license out, or maybe like some of these rare groups, they'll carry it all the way forward.
Yeah.
Will CMS decide that there are some molecules that, they just don't want to pay industry for anymore, but they'll fund and enable, other entities to create for them? I'm not sure what the outer limits here will start to look like. I do believe that these patient groups are the perfect launching point.
Yeah.
They're highly motivated, they're credible, they're resourceful. But I'm excited to see who else starts to emerge as sort of the followers once this trail has been blazed.
I think Suchi had a bit of an issue with her laptop. It is back. All good.
No,
We were
I'm so
watching
sorry.
you. We were watching you smiling away there. It's all good.
Oh no.
But all good, all good. So I
Okay.
think we covered a lot around the research side, Craig. I think one of the things people don't know about you also is you're really a great, open, curious mind when it comes to innovations. Right? You're always the one. I used to call you, and I still do, the Oracle, because anytime I saw something new, I'd say, I bet Craig's seen about 6 of these. Let me give him a ring. How do you do that? Do people find you? Do you seek them out? Or do they come to you and say, hey, I got this idea? And where do you have the time? Because there's so much going on at the moment.
It is something I always block my calendar to make time for these inbound conversations from the curious, from the developers. And I have to say, Ritesh, sometimes I get such a kick where, I'll have somebody with like maybe a Series B funded company, and they'll try to network through somebody to meet me so that maybe I'll take a call with them. And then at the same time, I'll have like a kid who's in their second year in college who just messages me on LinkedIn, and we have a call that afternoon. And I'm like, look at how resourceful some of these people can be. And they'll just reach out, and I answer and we talk. And I feel better and smarter as a result.
Exactly.
And maybe, hopefully, I was able to help them in the process, maybe from, experience of mine or from trusted friends in my network that I can also connect them to. But I think that's, just been a source of fuel for me, and, hopefully something I can continue to do. But it's something I always, just make that time for. And I find, there are good folks that reach out on LinkedIn, and hopefully for folks that are out there, when you get those messages on LinkedIn, I get it. A lot of them are, how much software do you want developed? Call me, I can help you, or God knows what else.
I get a ton of those, right?
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Whatever else there. I'm sure you're getting the, Ritesh, I could write your book for you. I'm sure everybody wants to write the book of Ritesh.
Yes.
Right. But in between all of those are a couple of really good young folks that are just trying. And, for a lot of folks in your audience, like 10 minutes of your time is going to be worth like a month of accelerant for those people or more. So, for folks to give that, there's so much you get back from it. And I feel fortunate that folks find me that way, and I'm going to still be there for them.
And thank you for referring some of them to me as well. I learn a lot every time, so it's great stuff. So Hopefully, I've sent
Especially,
you some
these
good ones as well. So,
these young folks that have, I know there are some people that say, oh, this current generation, they're lazy, they're just sitting around, blah blah blah. And then you meet these folks that are truly hustling, like they are
and
truly,
passionate, and
right?
passionate.
They're passionate, they're learning, they're trying to get out there and connect and learn as much as they can
Yeah.
from whoever is willing to share time. And then they're building, they're hands-on, they're building, they're coding, they're figuring out how to code today, and trying to get it out there for people to get experience with. And I admire that. And I get it though. Like it is tough in the current environment, like we said, to stand apart with a software product.
Yeah.
But there are good people out there trying, and I'm gonna, do what I can to help those that I can.
Love that. That's amazing.
So we've got about 5 more minutes. I was thinking, we could go a little bit into the, I think the future as we talk to is thinking about 10 years out. But over the next year, right, what are some of the things you'd love to see happen in this, in the industry that we're in when it comes to down to the patient, right? Grace Cordovano reminds us it's all about the patient. Kat McDavid reminded us on a call about patients, right? You're doing the same thing. How do we bring therapies to those patients who have been, left by the big pharma companies? What do you see over the next year? What's your hope for the next year? Forget 5 years. With next year, what would you like to see us do in the industry, in the pharma industry, or the research capability?
We've had a very tumultuous 2 years in the biopharmaceutical industry in general. There's been a lot of turnover, a lot of pipeline pruning. When the pharmaceutical companies, the bigs, are cutting back therapeutics in their portfolio and they're cutting back on headcount, it trickles down to everybody, right? Because this is like, whether you believe in trickle down economics or not, it's true in our little microcosm, right? And so I feel like we're in this period of kind of maybe some restabilizing organizations going forward. Yeah, there's still some headcount reductions that are kind of floating out there, but most organizations seem to be stabilizing. Now, we were at a place where I think we were getting closer to normalizing certain things, normalizing getting patient input and insight in the design and planning of your studies, normalizing how you can evaluate and consider different digital and decentralized elements and how those can help to meet some of the needs of patients and others around the planning of our study, our new endpoint, or whatever that may look like. How do we start to factor that back in? I feel like we lost some momentum there with so much knowledge and staff that were lost in so many organizations. I feel like we may have lost a beat. That also happened at the same time that there was a lot of attention around the investigator site, the site burden, site burnout at research sites. And so I think we started to shift a lot of our lens from what is the patient telling us and what burden is the patient facing to what is the site telling us and what is the burden that they are facing. And I get it. You have to put on your oxygen mask before you can put it on, the person you're traveling with. We need our sites to be stable and resilient so that we can better support our patients. But unfortunately, this is one of these spaces where we have to walk and chew gum at the same time. It's easy for us to kind of take our eyes off of patient need and patient burden because we're putting so much current attention on site need and site burden, and we can't let that happen. That to me is something that started to slip as our reductions were happening in this ecosystem. We need to pull that back because that's how we'll make sure we're truly understanding and meeting the needs of patients. And if we want to claim this badge of being patient centric, that's these are table stakes.
Fantastic, amazing stuff. Dulce, any last thoughts or comments we could go on for another hour here.
Yeah. Well,
we'll
if you were to go back and sort of redesign the whole process, are there things that stand out from your own experience and learnings?
It's a great question. I mean, it's easy to say we should be co-designing these types of development programs more thoughtfully with patients, but easier said than done. And what
Mhm.
patients are you supposed to be co-designing with? If you pull 3 patients into your corporate headquarters, does that mean you're, now a patient-centric organization? Or are they just a bunch of white guys like me? Like who are these patients, right? And how representative are they? And so, like, I think there are different patient insight levers to be able to draw upon at different times, and organizations need to be thoughtful about which part of the drug development process they're on and which levers they have access to for how to get that patient voice and insight at the table. I see online some companies are kind of like saying, oh, we leave an empty chair here. It reminds us that there's a patient that should be in the room. I'm like, the chair shouldn't be empty. Like, you should put a patient in that chair, and you can, and there are ways to do it. And so take advantage of those. And but don't do it because you have a box to check, and don't
Yeah,
do it just to virtue signal. And like, you can actually benefit from
yeah,
having these insights throughout. um, so that to me is one, let's do this more systematically different. And then the next one, would be, to me, having a thoughtful process for how you evaluate these digital and decentralized opportunities early in your development planning. It can't be when you've got a protocol already done. It's got to be upstream. But people are rushing, and they don't always have access to the right experts and expertise at the right time. Smart companies are developing different types of, review processes to be able to bring internal and external experts around the table at that right time during protocol design. Some are trying to stand up internal tools so that when they're designing new protocols, different recommendations can be surfaced from tools. Whatever your strategy, just making sure that you're not losing that opportunity, because once you've baked the protocol,
then,
even 90% of the way there, nobody wants to go backwards and
yeah,
start talking about
Mhm.
a different endpoint or a
yeah,
different way to measure change at a study visit.
yeah. Agreed. Totally agree.
Amazing.
Craig,
Wow.
as I said to Suchi just now, we could go on for another hour with you, but maybe we'll do a part two if you don't mind. Maybe
Yes,
a couple of months
that
from
would
now.
be
Well, I'll
wonderful.
leave a teaser. We can talk about China and a recent visit I
Yes,
Yeah.
had
I was
there,
just
and
gonna
people
say
love
we
talking
missed
about
that.
China.
Yes,
Interesting
everybody's talking
topic.
about
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Just very quickly though, did you have a good time in China? Was it a fascinating experience?
I learned a great deal over
Yeah,
there about, and I came away with a much more clear appreciation of where are they, like, really light years ahead, and where
Mm,
is it that it's just still hard to get
mm,
this work done.
yeah,
Which I hate to say was like refreshing to hear them
yeah,
express some of the similar pain points, but at least it was an appreciation that, like, there isn't some secret solution out there that we're
yeah,
just oblivious to.
yeah.
Some of it is just hard work right now.
And I think in their daily lives, though, they seem to be a little ahead of us with the use of technology and, driverless cars and electronic cars and payment systems on your phone and that sort of stuff, right? They seem to be a little bit more connected.
Oh yeah, and in everyday life for sure, and you certainly see
Yeah,
that in a number of markets. If you
yeah,
that you may, and you're, I know, traveling everywhere, Ritesh, but and certainly like the level of investment in drug discovery is remarkable, and the
right.
mm,
ability to scale therapeutic solutions that
Yeah,
look promising is extraordinary. But evidence generation, this kind of messy middle of clinical research, there's not some like crazy secret weapon
mm,
that they're deploying. People are working really hard over there. The investigators and coordinators will tell me how they're there at 6 in the morning and they're not getting out till after dinner. Like, they're just working hard. It's not, there's not some like crazy hack out there right now.
yeah.
Um, we have to work hard too, in these
There you
other
go.
markets and take advantage of some of the innovations that are, emerging and at our feet.
Amazing. Craig, thank you so much for joining us today. Suchi and I are honored to have you on our humble hang. I
It's a
look
absolutely.
pleasure
forward.
to hang with you both.
There
Yeah,
you go. I look
this
forward
is
to more
amazing.
conversations. This is going to be fun. So look forward to hosting you again.
Thank you guys. And thank you for all you're doing to create this great space for great conversations. It's a pleasure
Super.
to be here. Thanks.
This was the humble hang with Craig Lipset. Suchi, Have a great day, Craig. Have a great day. Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye bye.